What's going on, everybody? So tonight I'm going to talk about something a lot of people don't really think about, and it's kind of the nature of what the thing or the problem is. And that thing is called collateral consequences. When if you steal something from your mom's purse or from a cookie jar when you're a kid or in the store or something, you've got things that happen that are part of that. I mean, if you steal something from mom's purse, you might get in trouble. You might get grounded. You might get spanked, depending on your parents' school of thought. But steal something from a store, your parents are probably going to get involved, certainly. Um, so you have consequences that happen from an action or a decision. And especially with a criminal type charge or an arrest, you have what are a lot of times called collateral consequences, and those collateral consequences can really be a big deal, and it's something that you don't really think about. When you're committing crimes, certainly, and you should, and that should be all the more reason not to do those things. But they are things that reasonably go with, in some cases, reasonably go with the the problem that you're having or the reason that you were arrested. So you can imagine if someone committed a sex crime, they wouldn't be able to be they'd be labeled a sex offender at that point, and they wouldn't be able to go within X amount of feet of a school or playground, whatever the rules or the laws of the area dictate. So, but when you're arrested, there's consequences for being arrested because employers can check arrest records. There's Facebook groups and newspapers and other kinds of media um, that report people's arrests, not even necessarily conviction, just an arrest. To be clear, there's a difference between an arrest and a conviction. An arrest means there was probable cause to arrest you. A reasonable amount of information saying that you probably may have possibly done something. That's about what it is. But when you have a conviction, it's a little different. A conviction is either you pled guilty or you were convicted in a trial, and legally you did it, so you're guilty. Um, an arrest is one thing, but then you have the actual conviction itself, and it depends on if it's a low level type thing like a speeding ticket. I mean, you get consequences for that. You have your license may be affected, your ability to drive for a period of time may be affected, your insurance rates are going to be affected. A little sick tonight, so I'm try to muscle on through it here. Um, but if you're convicted or plead guilty to a misdemeanor or to a felony, then there's a lot more consequences that can go with that. That's kind of what I want to talk about tonight. So, when I was arrested, obviously one of the consequences is that I wasn't inside anymore. I wasn't able to lay in my own bed. I wasn't able to do as I wanted to do and associate with who I wanted to associate with. Wasn't able to go to my refrigerator. I talk about that a lot. I love my fridge. Wherever it may be, or whatever house or whatever environment it may be, I like having a refrigerator. Um, but you're taken out of society, so that's one consequence, obviously. That's just it goes with being arrested and being in jail or being in prison. Um, I had a few more, and they're many. There's many of them, and it's something that people need to think about when they commit crimes, whatever it may be. And for me, it was there were several. So um, just after I was arrested, the the grandparents of my daughter that me and my wife had, they went to court and filed for an emergency protection order request, basically. I know it's so bad smoking, you shouldn't smoke, shouldn't do it, but it's helping me with the kind of clear through some of the yuck that I've got. So I'm very got some medication tonight and feel a little better, a little bit clearer. But um, so the grandparents of my daughter, she's at the time she was 5. They went to court and and they were granted an emergency protection order and a guardianship order. Um, so at that point, that meant that when that order happened, they went to my grandma's house where I was staying at. When I was arrested, they went there and had some sheriff's deputies with them, and they were able to take my daughter from my grandma because of that order. So that was one consequence of my actions and what happened and led to, you know, my actions led to that, and I've got no one to blame but me. But so you're arrested, you may lose your children for a period of time. I'll talk more about that later on. But when I was in jail, I had, because I was an emergency medical technician at the time that I was arrested, I had an investigator from the Board of EMS come to me in the jail and ask me to sign some paperwork. And one of those was an immediate termination, suspension of my EMT certification. And that was because I'd been arrested, not because I was convicted, because this was in October. I was arrested September 30th, 2009. So October, I had a K-Beams Board of EMS investigator come and talk to me and ask, didn't ask me anything that happened, but he just said there's a pending criminal charge against you. If you're convicted, then you will lose your certification, your ability to practice as an EMT. We're going to go ahead and do that now. If you want to sign this agreed order, then if you're acquitted, then by all means, it'll be, you'll be reinstated. If it's not, then you're going to be suspended, and there's a revocation process to go through for that. So it was one of those forms. First few days of being in jail, meeting this guy, never talked to him before, I haven't talked to him since. I signed it. So there wasn't really anything else I could do. Other than that, I remember being in the jail and getting notified of some of the things that the grandparents of my daughter were doing, and I really couldn't fight back. I mean, I was in jail, and I was in a cell 23 hours a day. I couldn't really intelligently, I didn't know the law, wasn't a lawyer then, not a lawyer now, but I couldn't really fight back and defend my interest in that and what I wanted and what I felt should have happened. So that was another consequence of being arrested. As far as a conviction, when you're a convicted felon, you lose a lot of rights. You lose, in my state, you lose the right to vote. It's one of the few states that still, there's 3, I think, that disenfranchises you permanently in most cases, some cases. They've changed some stuff here recently, and that's kind of what we're talking about. But you can't vote. Can't vote in any major elections. If you do, it's a separate crime in and of itself to do that. You definitely, federally and statewide, you can't buy a gun. There's some people, I remember when I was in jail and prison, they would talk about, well, when you get out, you can get your gun rights back. Doesn't happen. Doesn't exist. At least not my experience. I've never seen anyone who's a convicted felon be able to legally possess a gun, unless they get a pardon. And that's really your only option. There's maybe some other things. There was a program that the ATF offered back in 1992 was the last time it had any kind of funding, and that program was defunded by Congress basically, and so they're not processing, they're not even accepting the applications under the program to do it. So you lose the ability to have a gun legally, any kind of a gun. Doesn't matter if it's a black powder, a rifle, a musket loader, a flintlock, a blunderbuss, whatever. Doesn't matter. You can't have a gun. And that creates some different issues that, I feel a certain way about it, but not what we're talking about. So you can't vote, you can't have a gun, you can't have public office. A lot of jobs, they're going to do background checks, and they're going to see that felony or that misdemeanor, that terroristic threatening, or that, urination in public that wasn't one of your finest moments when you were drinking with all your friends. So, or other things. I mean, employers run background checks a lot of times. They may not always, but the problem that gets into is when, if you're deceptive or if they don't specifically ask about it and they find out about that later on, then that can be an issue depending on the profession or the job that you have. That can be an issue. In most cases, they can fire you in and of itself for that because you weren't honest. You didn't disclose that. And that may not be asked, and that's one way to handle it, but, it's kind of a weird subject as far as that goes with employers. You have a lot of other consequences if you're in the country illegally and you break a law here in the United States. Different things happen to you than what happened to anybody else. So that gets into some problems, and there's been some cases that I've read that are relevant. One of those cases came out of Kentucky, and it talked specifically about collateral consequences of a conviction. So Padilla versus Kentucky was the case that I'm thinking about, but it talked about collateral consequences and someone who had a detainer and immigration issue. So if you want to read that, look for that Padilla, Padilla versus Kentucky. You have a lot of other things that happen. I mean, you when you're arrested and you're convicted, you're on that side of the law. So puts you in kind of a different perspective than you may be used to, and that can be good and that can be bad. But most people, it's not great. So it lets you know pretty clearly who you are and your, I guess, your worth. You could argue at some point. I think people are worth a lot more than the worst thing on the worst day that they've done. And it may not be the worst day. They may have just had a bad Tuesday and decided to rob somebody. You never know. But people can change. And that's the thing about collateral consequences. They tend to cast this shadow on someone that may or may not be justified. I'm not saying that it isn't always justified, because it might be. But I have to believe generally that isn't correct, and that isn't right. I'm going to introduce my cup here. It's my ubiquitous cup. I always have it with me. Happen to be a Black Rifle Coffee label there. Give them a little plug there. It's really good coffee. But there's other things that happen. You have, if you're a doctor or a lawyer or a real estate agent, other professions have issues when it comes to you being arrested. If you're an armed security guard and you get arrested for a firearms issue, that can impact your license, your ability to be a armed security guard. If you're a doctor and you have a drug charge, you're a nurse, you have a drug charge. That's a collateral consequence. The board that oversees that licensure, that professional occupation, is going to probably get involved in that at some point. That's something you need to think about if you want to go out and commit crimes, because it's not where it's at. You can have civil lawsuits that can happen. Your conduct you can get sued for that in certain situations, and that can have an effect. It'll have an effect on your pocketbook. It'll also be in your financial, your financial history, and that's another kind of a thing to think about when you have restitution that can be made a part of that. And that's financial payment to a victim in a case, or a victim's family, or a bank, or an entity, or if you embezzle money from a group or a board or a charity agency, you're going to have to pay that back, and that's another consequence besides the conviction itself. So, and then you have the consequence of going to prison, which that's not really a collateral consequence. That's the end result most times of being arrested and being charged and being convicted of a crime or pleading guilty. So, and being arrested and going to jail and prison is not fun. It's not a good place. There can be some growth and some good things to come out of it. And fortunately for me, it did in my case. But it doesn't always happen that way. Some people go in there and they never come out, or they never come out the same person they were. And, that's awful. It really is. I think the statistics that I've looked at recently, our recidivism rate in this country is about 75%. So about 3/4 of people that are arrested and go to jail or prison, recidivism is defined as if you are rearrested within 3 years of your release on a new charge or a violation of some kind. So 3/4 roughly, 3/4, 2/3, numbers fluctuate. I've seen 66%, I've seen up to 75%. Depends on the state and the area. But it's a pretty high rate of people that are released and then end up coming back for some reason or another. So you have the recidivism that causes you to come back. And once you're in the system, I can tell you, I didn't believe this before I got arrested. People talk about, well, once you're in the system, you're always there. I can see that to an extent. If you're a known troublemaker, if you're known for breaking into houses, that's what you do. You're a burglar. Then, maybe when a burglary happens in a neighborhood, detective might know you or know your past or might have arrested you, they might try to pin that charge on you, for lack of a better phrase. But I mean, it does happen. Not to say that it always happens. It doesn't. But if you hold yourself out there to be someone that is a burglar and a burglary happens, they might charge you with it. They might look at you, might question you, see where you're at, get your alibi, whatever. So that's how you stay in that system. Um, the collateral consequences are really something that, again, a lot of people don't think about and they don't understand because they don't fully think out their actions and what things can lead to. And the other thing is that about 95% of people that are arrested are released. So 5% of people either are executed or have life sentences where it's natural life and you're never getting released. Majority of people, though, are going to get out of prison at some point, or out of jail at some point. So, corrections, I think, speaking from my experience, corrections could and should do a better job at what they're supposed to do. But, in the end, really what they're boiled down to is their job is to hold you, is to just be basically a glorified babysitter. A very expensive infrastructure required, expensive babysitter. But, I don't have the answers to those things as far as why some people go to prison for a year or 2 or 5 and never get out because they get so many more charges while they're in there, or they come out and they do something horrible, and you could argue that the cause is traced back to the time they spent in prison. And so situations like making a murderer, where you have someone that goes to prison and then comes out, there's numerous cases where people, I'm not going back, and they get into a shootout with the police, they flee, they run away, and they get into a crash and they kill somebody, they kill an officer, they kill a family. It happens. So those things are things that shouldn't happen, but they do, and you never know when it can happen to you. I think the collateral consequences are something that people should really think about, and you have a lot of other things that can happen that I didn't talk about that I may be missing. If you notice something that I'm missing that can come from an arrest or a charge or an indictment or a conviction, please let me know in the comments below. I'll try to answer back. But these are all things that surround an arrest, or when you do something wrong, or when you're accused of that, or when you're convicted of that. So it's something to think about, and it's something that I went through. I was an EMT. I can no longer be an EMT anymore. I'm a convicted felon, so I can't possess a gun. I can't vote in Kentucky. It's a scarlet letter, I guess, basically. It's somewhat well earned, somewhat not well earned. I mean, but it's something that you will always have, around you and hanging over you, and it's up to you to kind of get out from under that and make something else of yourself, whatever it may be. Whether it's a guy making YouTube videos who's trying to talk to people, or something else, I don't know. It's up to you. But one of the consequences that I hate the most out of my situation that happened is that my mom tried to get visitation with my daughter. Had a daughter. She was 5 when I was arrested. I didn't see her. Last time I saw her was in October of 2009. So when I got to the first prison I was assigned to be at, I got into the law library and started looking in there and seeing what I could do, if anything, from there. I developed a strategy as far as how to get visitation with myself, and what I came up with myself was that it would not be wise for me to try to get visitation directly initially. So the better thing that I thought about was to try to get grandparent visitation with my mom. So my mom could, she's my family, obviously. She's my daughter's grandmother. If I could get visitation with her, she could get visitation and keep it for a while, then that could lay the foundation for me to get visitation with my daughter in some form, letters or phone calls or whatever. So she did that. was able to get that finally, and then the outcome of that was that the other side of things, my daughter's other grandparents decided to file an adoption petition not 2 weeks after the visitation hearing was held finally and granted. So they filed for an adoption. I defended that adoption myself from prison and contested it and argued and fought and kicked and screamed. It didn't really seem to matter. The judge in that situation decided to give them the adoption, and I appealed that as well from prison still. Um, I was served with the adoption in 2013, the day after I graduated from legal aid training, actually. Um, so I started working on that when the adoption hearing happened. Later on that year, I worked on the appeal, went through a bunch of loopholes and hurdles and struggles trying to get that appeal completed into the court to have them review it. And finally, they did hear it and they made a decision. That decision was published in it was a published opinion. So when you have court opinions, they're generally known as memorandum opinions, or not to be published, or they're to be published opinions that are binding precedent and have some force in law. And the Court of Appeals decided to make my case, the appeal and the result of that appeal, binding case law. So lower courts in Indiana and other states, according to the rules that they may have, an individual can point to that case and say, this happened over here, so you should probably do this if the situation facts-wise matches up with that case. So, and then there was, when I was released from prison, there was some other lower court hearings that happened where I tried to get visitation, and in the end, what it comes down to is that I went through a bunch of stuff. I paid for a separate attorney for my daughter. I paid for a psychological evaluation of my daughter and for myself. Went through a bunch of other things to get this parental visitation, and after an exhaustive evaluation by the doctor that I paid for and seeing that report, some other factors, I decided to just stop. And it bothers me, but I think in the situation it was the best thing I could have done, and that's truly how I feel, that it was the best thing to do to stop, because for a lot of things. One, I don't think that a judge, with the facts and the situation and the things that were written and the things that I read and the things that were reported as her words, she didn't want to see me. So I'm not some boogeyman or some scary man, but she didn't want to see me. I didn't really see a judge ordering her, being the age that she's just turned 16. So this was a couple years ago. But I didn't see a judge ordering her to see me. And even if the judge did, the first time she came home or complained that the visitations were too harsh, they were going to yank him anyway. So at that point, if that would have happened, what did I really accomplish? I wouldn't have accomplished anything, and it would have hurt her. That's not what I want to do. So she's 16 now. She turned 16 back in August. She can make her own decisions, and I'll be here, and I'll be sober and out of custody and not in prison, and there for her to answer whatever questions I may be able to answer. Got a 1-year-old son. He just turned 1 on September 1st, and love him very much, and can't wait to see his life and what he goes through and what he deals with and sees, and what he thinks about things, especially walking and talking. That's coming pretty soon, I think. So I'm out of prison. I'm glad for that. Love my refrigerator. Love my baby. Love my girlfriend. So these other things that happen when you're arrested or when you're convicted, they're not things that people generally think about, but the things you need to think about. And if that's a dissuadement to get you to not commit crimes, fine. To do that. Just don't break the law. It's not fun to break laws. Laws are meant to be broken. Because all these other things that'll happen you may not have thought about, that'll be just as severe or worse. Getting the papers, the adoption, of my daughter, it hurt me more than anything else. Um, and I can't say enough about that. That finding out that some people that were not her parents thought that they were more fit parents than I was, and for a time that was the situation. That got reversed, but it was still a situation until that happened. So, if you have any questions or comments, leave them in the description below or in the comments below. I keep saying that. Sorry, I'm tired. I'll try to get back with you and answer back. So, thanks.